Good day and welcome. Today we're going to talk about future of work. It's a really interesting topic. And admittedly, it's a topic that has come up many times before. In fact, every time we go through an evolution in technology, this topic comes up. It came up at the industrialization age when we went from being an agriculture-based economy into industrial economy. It came up subsequently when we started introducing robotics in the manufacturing workforce. It's come up more recently as personal computers started pervasively getting integrated into knowledge workers' day-to-day work. And it's come up again. Except this time it's different. It's the velocity of change is very high and the size of impact is enormous. And a lot of that is coming on the back of innovation that's happening in artificial intelligence. I'd love to explore that a little deeper with you and with three guests that I've asked to join us today. I'm going to introduce them to you quickly, and then I'll ask them to turn their cameras on and come online as I take you through them. Our first guest today is Rob Laubacher. Rob, if you can come online, and I'll just spend a minute introducing you. Rob actually joins us from Boston. He's been at MIT since the late 1990s, and he's been researching at the Center of Collective Intelligence. And a lot of the work he's doing around hyper-specialization and the notion of collective intelligence plays right into the future of work. Rob, welcome.
Good to be here.
Fantastic, and your audio is great. You know, I'm going to ask you one quick question, really just to get you introduced to our audience today, and give me a quick answer, and then we'll move on to the next panelist. What is collective intelligence?
Well, we define it as groups of individuals working together in ways that look intelligent. And the individuals can be people, animals sometimes, computers. And we use an intuitive definition of intelligence, basically effectiveness or adaptiveness. And if you use this definition, you realize that it's been around for a long time. Go back to the savannah and bands of hunters-gatherers, larger groups under kings, in the industrial era, modern governments and corporations. So you might ask, why did we at MIT start a Center for Collective Intelligence a decade ago? The reason is that we saw new possibilities with combinations of people and computers. First, with the global connectivity you have with the internet, and now with artificial intelligence. So what we're trying to do is to research how combinations of people and computers can be smarter and more effective. And we actually think this is a very useful perspective for executives to take, to think about how they can combine their people and their not just computing, but also all their machines in ways that make their organization more collectively intelligent.
Fantastic. Well, we'd love to hear a little bit more of those insights as we get further into the discussion, but I love the notion of human in the loop, computers in a group, which I know is kind of one of the founding ideas. Look, let me just shift to our second guest. As you know from previous episodes of this podcast series, we try and bring very deep and very diverse perspectives. And so joining us today is our second guest, Lawrence Collins. And Lawrence, if you'll come online while I just quickly introduce you. Now, Lawrence, we've spoken before, actually at Deloitte, built out their future of work center of excellence and really consulted and advised large corporations around the world on the notion of future of work. And more recently, he's actually created a future of work incubator and accelerator where there's been a number of startups that operate in the future of work space, particularly around human resources, that have come through and become part of the accelerator. And so it's just been great to sort of pull him into the discussion from the world of consulting and advising clients and actually working hands-on with new tech in the space. With that said, Lawrence, just to get a sense for you, for our audience, what's kind of the number one question you get asked as you meet with CXOs on the future of work?
Hello, Sanjay. So I think first thing to say is that it is definitely now firmly and squarely a boardroom agenda item. I think the specific nature of the question, and I hate to give a consultant answer about it, depends, but I see through our research 3 discrete categories of organisation. The questions tend to look at where do we get started? And if we have started, how do we accelerate some form of adoption? And if we're on the journey of adoption, how do we start using future of work to really change the meaningfulness of the whole employee and also worker experience to create something more around than just a profit or value in financial terms kind of output. It's really down to, I think, the whole substance and fabric of our relationship between us as individuals and humans and what we do with the majority of our time in terms of our working lives and the benefits we derive from that.
Okay, fantastic. I know we'll spend time on that topic, so we'll come right back to that. And let me introduce our third guest and we'll get started. Before I do that, Lawrence, I think your articulation was very clear, as it was very good for our conversation. Your audio is a little light, and it may just be because you're a little further away from your computer. If you want to go offline for 30 seconds while I introduce our third guest and just see if there's a way you can either get closer to the microphone and help there, that'd be great. Otherwise, we'll try and see if we can do something, if our technical teams can do something about it. That said, let me actually introduce our third guest. And again, we wanted to bring a very diverse and a different perspective. And this one is actually right from the operating floors of large corporation. And actually, I'm very happy to bring one of our own, Gianni Giacomelli. And Gianni, if you'll come online. Now, it turns out Gianni has been with Genpact and runs our innovation program. So he's our Chief Innovation Officer. Alongside that, he's been working with many of our clients, helping and consulting with them on how to drive innovation at scale in their own environments. And as a part of what he does now is he's focused internally within Genpact on actually helping us deal with the future of work and scale our company into that new future. And we'll come back and talk a little bit about that as we get to the hows of it. Incidentally, Gianni also serves in a different role. He co-leads the MIT design lab on the Center of Collective Intelligence. And so he brings a mix of sort of advanced thinking from the research world and operational thinking from the here and now and today of dealing with real issues. So it'd be really good to get his perspective. Gianni, welcome. One of the things we've asked you to lead for the company is the word, in a word, genome. Tell us what genome is.
Hey, Sanjay. Look, genome is a little bit about the renewal of the knowledge and the capabilities, the fabric of the work we do, right? Our associates deliver the work that we do. As today, as we recorded, we have 87,000 people in the company. So that capability will change. The work that these people, our people, will do over time will change. Their interaction with machines will change. How do we prepare them for that, right? So that, the concept of genome is really, how do we create an organism that collectively, so it's also collective genome, helps creating and delivering better solutions for our clients, especially in a world in which those solutions are very multifunctional, right? Everybody has their own specialty, but the reality is very often these days you need to interoperate with other people who have other capabilities, and so that interoperation requires knowledge in itself. So genome is about the collective intelligence of our company, really, and how we help our people get to it.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Look, guys, we're going to get started. As you'll see, we've got three really deep thinkers and thought leaders from the frontiers of research, from the frontiers of new startups that are driving innovation around artificial intelligence, and from the frontiers of real large corporation operating experience and getting the nitty-gritty of what needs to get done. And so with that said, and those three guests online, let's get started. Look, the discussion's going to be very simple. We'll focus on three things. First, we'll talk about what is the future of work and really get into a little bit more substantive discussion on what that is. Then we'll move on to, if I am a Fortune 500 CX, so as many of you are in the audience today, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for me? So we're just going to get right down to brass tacks on that. And then I think really we want to spend time on the how. So what do we do about it? How do we get started? How do we get set up for this future of work that is inevitable and around the corner? And so we'll just spend time on those three things, and we'll try and make this very interactive, if you will. For those of you that are joining us, there's a LinkedIn channel. There is an ability to actually ask questions now and or later. And I'll request the panelists and our guests today to be to respond to it as they come up. So hopefully we'll make this very interactive. As always, please continue to give me ideas on topics you want to cover in the future. And so we're going to get started. What is the future of work? Let me get a few ideas on that. Let's start with Rob, your perspective.
Well, you actually prompted me to think about the parallels between the Industrial Revolution and the digital revolution. And I think that's a great parallel and a great frame to think about what we're going through now. With the Industrial Revolution, machines were able to reduce the amount of physical labor required to produce goods. And then, as we have now, there was anxiety about the impact of this on jobs. The word Luddite, which we now use for someone who's opposed to new technologies, grew out of a group of hand weavers who were worried that they would lose their jobs because the mechanical loom was being introduced in England. And some of them actually broke these mechanical looms in protest and sabotaged them. And that's where the word Luddite comes from. And their concerns were understandable, but what happened was a little counterintuitive. The hand weavers actually did get displaced by mechanical looms, but the cloth that got produced was way less expensive than before. And as a result, demand for cloth just exploded. And, you know, by at least an order of magnitude over the next century. So even though the workers, you know, were doing different tasks, there were more workers in the textile industry a century later than there were in the late 1700s and the early 1800s. So today we have computers reducing the amount of work required from people to do mental tasks. And what will happen, as with cloth, is that those outputs of those computing enabled mental tasks will be much cheaper. And as a result, the demand will increase. So for example, machine learning is now encroaching in areas where, you know, data scientists were doing advanced analytics. I think what we can expect to see is companies will use more of that output because it will be less expensive. So complex analytics will get used a lot more because it's a lot cheaper. But I also think there'll be new kinds of jobs that emerge, like there were new kinds of jobs tending the machines in the cloth factories, doing new kinds of things like designing and kind of overseeing operation of machine learning systems. And because of the increased demand for analytics, you may in fact see more people working in those domains than we have now. So there are some jobs where there are going to be displacements. Obviously, there are going to be evolution of some jobs. But the point is that when we think about technology and jobs, I think one thing that we tend to forget is the impact of shifts in demand because of the reduced costs of these outputs that are now enabled in new ways by machines. And we have to make sure we keep that top of mind when we think about how things will evolve.
That's super interesting, Rob, because what you've really laid out for us is the core construct of, as the future work changes, there is a level of value shift. In other words, we shift up to higher value-added roles. But there's also a concept of net new, which is new kinds of jobs that get created that weren't previously existing, but before the innovation and the technology that actually brought that around. So it's actually, you know, almost two halves. There's a half about, you know, how to shifting up the value of the work into higher value-added activities, and there's a half about net new roles, net new jobs that kind of come through because, and as a result of the innovation that's come in. So let's actually just zoom in a little bit more. I mean, I think, Lawrence, you spent some time, and then through the work you do with the Incubator, what are the different categories that you see of the new roles in the future of work?
So I think this is a really exciting area of future of work, and it's a place where both the startups are disrupting and thinking and indeed creating many of those new types of jobs, either directly or indirectly as a result of their innovations. And similarly, enterprises are beginning to think about jobs in a very different way as well. What is clear, and from the sort of enterprises that we've seen that started a future of work transformation type journey, the starting point is often to stop thinking about jobs because it tends to drive a one-to-one relationship with a human being or an employee more traditionally. And we're seeing the advent of phrases like pixelation of work, breaking work down into tasks. And of course, when we then look to map that across to some of the innovation that's coming through the startups, many of those tasks are now either being automated completely or are providing machine-driven intelligence to essentially augment the task of the human, now with the capability of some of the technology. So I'm seeing sort of three discrete categories of new type of work. The first one is really incremental sort of new job categories. So they're essentially skills that we are familiar with today being repackaged and repurposed, often in support of new types of technology. So, for example, we look at the ability to train AI. Now, we've had people that can build machine learning algorithms for numbers of years, but it's now the scale at which we're going to need that new work that will create the additional demand. The second area is where we're seeing new categories of work emerge. So these are being created at the forefront of new technologies where we haven't previously seen those sorts of skills. And quite often the best way of thinking about that in connection with startup technologies is areas of new languages. And there's new programming languages specifically where skills can emerge pretty much overnight. And then as the technology matures and progresses, these skills become in very high demand very quickly. And then the third category, I guess, is the crystal ball category, the work that's going to be invented that we don't know of yet. And I think we're still very much at the beginning of understanding just how new work creation and the future of work will create completely new categories that we haven't really discovered yet.
You know, it's a great comment. I'm reminded, by the way, for instance, that when we went through the personal computing revolution, it wasn't until we got PCs and eventually the internet that new job categories like search engine optimization or graphics design even emerged. Those careers were basically not even heard of, non-imagined, never even thought of prior to computers getting as pervasive as they've now come to be. So I completely get your point on the crystal ball. Let me shift a little bit and just get Gianni into the discussion. And Gianni, look, from the context of a almost 90,000 employee large global corporation across the world, what does the future of work look like for you?
Yeah, so let me build a little bit on what both Lawrence and Rob were talking about. I mean, we are a little bit of a canary in the coal mine, if you think about it. 90,000 people, bunch of time zones, professional services, really knowledge-based company. What will our people do? What will we do in the future in which, we do a bunch of things that we can do today? Well, first of all, I like the idea of we'll figure a bunch of things that we couldn't do today because it was cost ineffective to do them, but now with machines you can actually do a bunch more things, right? More analysis, more prediction. Cost of prediction is going to go down to zero. How do you create a completely new operating mechanism in companies, in our clients, to actually harness that? It's incredibly exciting. But then what will our people do in that scenario? So literally the way I think about it is people guiding the machines to deliver those operations at scale, right? You think about the running of the thing, which is actually really what we do very well, I think. From individual contributors to people use knowledge that is machine augmented now, right? People can help with predictions, and a lot of the heavy lifting of that prediction is done by the machines. So machines generate insight, they recommend choices, and then they enable delivery. But then you have humans who kind of connect the dots, they teach the machines, they control the output of the machine, and also they finish the job both functionally, sometimes there are exceptions, but also emotionally, because some of what the machine suggests that we should do and the output, sometimes needs to actually be communicated to other humans. And, very often that communication is best done by humans from an emotional standpoint. So there's a variety of work that can be done by people. The problem is, what got those people to where they are may not be what will get people to be able to be effective in that future of work. That is the challenge, but it seems to be a good challenge to me.
Yeah, look, I particularly like the fact that you brought up machine learning, because we do a lot of machine learning and artificial intelligence projects for clients across the globe. One of the things I think I'm always struck by is that there's a general perception that machine learning is 100% data scientists and AI engineers that can make it happen. And the reality can be further from that, right? The reality and what we've learned is actually machine learning is actually an intersection of two different skill sets. It's the computer science, the languages, and so on and so forth around machine learning. But equally, it's the domain and the process and the understanding that allows you to goal-orient the algorithm, that allows you to contextualize the findings, that allows you to distill the insights that come out. And all of that training and all of that management has to come from people that actually understand the domain. And so the reality is, even as we talk about machine learning, there's really two halves to make that whole. And a large part of that is the skill sets of today. I loved your comment about the canary in the coal mine. I love that. So let's just now zoom in into that, right? So I'm a large company CXO, as you are, Gianni, and I think many of you have obviously worked with and consulted, and obviously many of the people in our audience. Let's talk a little bit about what does it mean for me. So what does this new organization look like in my world? Rob, you want to take a cut at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the focus right now is really on AI, and the vision of AI working alongside people, and I think probably both Lawrence and Gianni can speak. I mean, I could talk about that, but the piece that I want to actually talk about, which I think is not looked at enough, is the ability of the global connectivity that we now have to connect talent to need in novel ways. And I sort of try to think of this as the Ubers and the Lyfts of talent. And you see some versions of this with things like Topcoder, which is an online community of a couple 100,000 software developers, and you can do software development using this community. They chop the work up into bits. I mean, it's a little bit, I'm talking about the hyper specialization that we've talked about. But I think that what we could see more of is people accessing spot talent markets. Kaggle's another example for analytics. So I think of a future where it's not just where you have the computers and the machines, but that also that you're as a large enterprise having places where you just find it more efficient to access spot talent on an as needed basis, the way that you now order a ride on Uber and Lyft. So you would find an expert to come in and evaluate the new design of your website from Topcoder, who's you get a user interface designer, or you're doing a new warehouse management algorithm and you want some people from Kaggle to maybe enhance it or something like that. And I feel as though there could be, we see the possibility, I think, of much more of this kind of stuff happening in the future. And I think that's something that enterprises would be good to at least start working in that way and start dipping their toe in with that kind of stuff. Because I think that's companies that can do that. I think, the AI, AI inside the company, I think a lot of people are going to be doing that. I think that accessing these spot talent markets could actually be a place where you could maybe, if you can gain some competencies there, I think you could actually find a distinctive advantage by being able to do that better than your competitors.
I thank you for that. I think that's super interesting. I mean, I think what you really found you correctly is saying is, look, there's a certain atomicity that is going to come through on the work associated with hyper specialization in each of those subtasks, whether it's looking at the quality of a website or designing the website or proofing the website, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that, I think, in turn and in parallel is also giving rise to kind of what's broadly known as the gig economy, this collaborative, crowdsourced, lots of different parties kind of getting involved. And I think the clear implication you're pointing out for large corporations like mine and others across this podcast is the notion of how do you leverage the ecosystem in a much more thoughtful manner. And I think that point's right on the mark. Let's expand that a little bit. Gianni, I'll turn to you. I mean, you're almost on the other side of that equation in some ways on the receiving end. What does this mean for you? And what are some of the things that you're firing up on to get us moving in the right direction?
Yeah, look, I think in the company of the future, you'll probably still need to have two macro types of activities. One is the running of the operations, right? And the other one is the building and the designing and the building of the operations. So let's take each one in turn. So the running of the operations, as we said, is going to be increasingly done by machines, right? Machines, when they get to learn what you do, especially in certain areas, they can actually do it better. They can augment you, and you really use them to run the shop. Otherwise, this is not the first time that we do something like this in our societies, but it's just we have AI now. We didn't have it before. So that's beautiful, and I think that's really interesting. The other part that is quite interesting is you will need to continue, especially because of pace of change in the world and technologies throwing new art of possible to you. You'll need to have really good groups of people to be able to design and then experiment and then build and then hand over for running those things. So there's a continuous muscle that kind of ashes, goes through the art of the possible, verifies what can be done within your company, builds it, and then disbands and moves on to the next thing. And we have some of those people today, but my money is on the fact that there's going to be a lot more of that need. And by the way, my money a little bit is on what Rob was saying. This isn't going to be just people within your company. Right? Our ability to actually detect and identify the right people for the job and hyper connectivity allows us to actually really, think of what we're doing today, right? We're doing this thing, all of us are in different places. We can interoperate, exchange ideas. It's actually pretty bleeding edge. You can do that in a nanosecond, irrespective of where you are, as long as I know who you are, and the system of incentive actually allows us to work together. That is going to be the future of our organizations, including ours, right? We actually have a model that has been used in something like that for many years now. It's been extremely successful in really bringing people from the outside, helping us to get the solutions that are as contemporary as they could possibly be. And then those people disband and they go do something else. It's actually quite useful because they always bring fresh ideas. And so those two big arms of the future of work, so the running, but also the designing, experimenting, and building, will actually require new capabilities, and hopefully will be the same people, but they will certainly learn new tricks.
Great. Lawrence, you're on the forefront of building some of these new capabilities. You've got an incubator that has a number of, or Accelerator that has a number of these startups in them. What do you see from that perspective?
So I think from the perspective of the startups, they're beginning to find their particular niche in regards to the future of work agenda. And to sort of draw the thread through from what Gianni and Robert have been discussing, I'm finding that work in the future, the organizations of the future, start their journey really with a change in mindset. So often that is about seeking to understand just how resilient their organization is today to the demands and the disruption that it's going to place on that organization in the future. So whether that is driving efficiency in some of the business as usual operations or driving creative thinking in the new sort of strategic challenger areas of the organization, the starting point is often to profile exactly what we actually start with in the organization skill ontology context. Then we find some of the startups start building upon that to start solving some pretty big problems. So for example, I'm working with one startup at the moment that is seeking to create the zero vacancy organization by using combinations of tacit knowledge across the organization, matching it at the point of demand to particular tasks or projects, and then connecting with external crowds, existing sort of networks of alumni, creating skill pools, so that you end up in a situation where organizations are resourcing in real time. You know, the notion of having to write a job requisition, get it signed off by 3 people, post it on a job board, wait 3 weeks for some applicants, go through a 6-month selection hiring exercise only for the individual not to turn up. That's no longer, you know, achieving the kind of levels of efficiency. That's the real, you know, fundamentals of what organizations are looking to drive out of this, and that's productivity. And it's not just faster and cheaper, it's actually around the quality and the impact of the work that's performed. So the startups that I see very successfully developing content and solutions in this area really understand that bigger meaning. And what I would also add is that the enterprises are beginning to understand that this is more than just adopting a few point technology solutions. They're beginning to look at this in a much more strategic and conceptual context, and looking at how they sort of drive sustainable improvement over a period of time through future work innovation.
Fantastic. Folks, we're going to change the pace a little bit. What I'd like to do is just do a few rapid fire questions. So these are questions that you will have a sentence to respond in, and this is going to keep the pace moving. I've got a few questions that I just want to throw out to this panel. I know our audience will be very interested in. Number one, what in your minds individually is the coolest job of the future? Rob?
I'm not sure if it's the coolest, but an interesting one will be orchestrating the interface between large enterprises and this external ecosystem of experts who are available on call.
Fantastic. Well, Lawrence, that just played into one of your startups, I guess, but you know, what's your view of the coolest job of the future?
I can tell you one that I came across this week, Sanjay, and that is Chief Amazement Officer. So that's how do we string together a number of different innovations and create something that is just wow beyond what we currently experience.
Well, we certainly have an explosion of titles at the CXO level, so I'll add that to the list of ones to talk about. Gianni, what about you? What's the coolest job for you?
I think it's time to actually get the HR folks into data science. So I do think that a HR data scientist, somebody who looks and coaches and connects and gets the data to coach and connect large workforces and get them to do more than what they would have imagined to be able to do is going to be pretty cool.
That's interesting. I know, Gianni, as an example, you mentioned that you've got 2 young daughters. It'd be interesting to see how you and your wife are coaching them towards their jobs of the future. Any quick insight for another parent of a teenager?
No, but if you figure out, let me know. I would that knowledge. Teenagers are interestingly, probably machine learning could figure them out at some point.
Yes, that's a whole other topic. Okay, folks, another quick question, round of questions. What is the most exciting app you've come across in this whole future work area? Rob?
Well, I was thinking more in the future. I want an app that will allow me access to the talent I need to finish a project.
Oh boy. Okay. All right. How about you, Gianni?
There's actually an app that's quite interesting. It's come out of MIT, actually. It's called Happy Meter, happy without an I instead of the Y. And they try to track actually the mood development and the engagement of people as they go through their day. It's still in a beta stage, but I think it's actually, there's something there, right? So there's an exciting development in that.
Yeah, I'm working actually pretty closely with that project, and it is very interesting.
It is cool.
Okay, we'll love to see it when it's out. Lawrence, how about you? An exciting app.
So firstly, Robert, we should talk afterwards because I might have the app for you, actually.
All right, Lawrence, so we'll have to exchange messages about this.
That would be great. I guess for me, I think the future is going to be less about individual apps and more about connectivity and how we actually rapidly deploy a series of apps to achieve an outcome. So for me, I'm really excited about the low-code type of integration apps. So for example, apps like Zapier, where they're really beginning to provide plug-and-play capability for non-technical resources to rapidly scale and rapidly deploy digital solutions.
Okay, those are all good ideas. I'm sure we'll look into a few of them, and I'm sure many of them will roll out. I'm going to shift to our third topic. We talked a little bit about what is the future of work. We talked a little bit about what does it mean for me if I'm a CXO of a large Fortune 500 company. Let's talk a little bit about the hows, right? So how do I get started? Where do I get set up? What's step 1? What's step 2? What's step 3? I'd like to just get some thoughts on that. Gianni, maybe I start with you.
Yeah, look, I think this is on the face of it, this can be overwhelming. I mean, you're talking about thousands of people, their behaviors. I mean, it's actually, this is less well behaved than engineering environments where we typically work in. What I start doing is actually start with the designing of the experience. And I think, interestingly, we've in the last 10 years, we actually made a lot of progress in actually designing experiences and then systems that deliver that experience. So start with the identification of personas, right? Don't think about segments, don't think about tools. Think about personas, which is, individual people in their roles. How do they go about their life? And get your people to actually designing those journeys and make sure that the knowledge flow that enables those journeys, because increasingly people will be used for knowledge that they can create, not for the rote knowledge that they could actually pull out of a machine. Machine will do that. So that those journeys need to be infused with that flow of knowledge, right? And so those two things, I think, the designing of the journey and the interspersing of those journeys with the flow of knowledge, so making sure that people get the knowledge they need at the point in which they need the knowledge. Because people are not machines. We can choke them quickly with knowledge. So again, think about design of the journey, and think about the flow of knowledge that enables that journey. I think those are the two big levers that one could actually use to break the problem down to a solvable level.
Great food for thought. Shifting gears a little bit with Lawrence, as you've advised clients in this, as you do a lot of work in this innovative ecosystem, what is your advice? Step 1, step 2, step 3, how do we get started?
So my advice is quite simple in terms of, you're starting a journey, what is it that you need if you're not quite sure where you're going to end up? So having the ability to navigate, having the ability to survive in different environments with the rate and the sheer magnitude of change that's coming along. Often it requires the right mindset and behaviors of the people that are leading that expedition into the future as well. So I think a lot of the key capabilities that we see in organizations that are embracing future work now have a sense of discovery and adventure about them. They're prepared to take risks. They're prepared to accept there might be some failure along the way. And I think having a manageable framework also helps greatly. So for example, be clear in terms of how you distinguish between experimenting with a new digital technology because you believe it has great potential and want to understand the implications of it. Think differently about how you strategize and link that to work, and specifically be clear on how work will be reorganized. And then finally, think about the human element. So to Gianni's point, I think personas are incredibly important, understanding what that means in terms of your proposition to your current workforce, but also the different type of workforce that you're going to have in the future. So those three lenses, I think, set organizations into a really good routine for thinking about the breadth of challenge that comes with future work.
Awesome. Thank you. Rob, from your perspective, what's your advice?
Well, I've observed a lot of fruitful experimentation and implementation of new ways of working at the business unit level, either functional or kind of product facing, externally facing business units. And I think there, what I found interesting is, it's easy to kind of think about reducing headcount and cutting costs, but I think that what's more interesting is figuring out ways to redeploy people who have the domain knowledge that you referred to, Sanjay, in creative ways to create more value for the client or for the B2C customer. So I think there's a lot of room for that kind of experimentation and incremental change. At the same time, I think at the senior level, the C-level suite needs to be thinking about when do we need to step in and really do a big transformative push to make ourselves digitally capable to kind of absorb all this stuff. And so I think there's kind of a need for both, experimentation at the local scale in the organization, but also at the senior level, occasionally saying, we really need to kind of blow some things up and make a big push to really be able to prepare ourselves, whether that be digital transformation or, kind of reframing of how we're thinking about HR. So that's kind of my observation from seeing companies wrestling with these issues, is that there's the local experimentation, which can do a lot, but then there are times when the senior folks need to come in and say, we really need to kind of turn this aircraft carrier in another direction.
I'm struck by some of the comments that were made, and I'm just going to read back a few of the comments that came through the discussion. This is a topic we could spend another 40 minutes and still not get done with it. Obviously, it's high in the minds of many of the folks we work with as well. I'd love to find ways to continue this discussion. Obviously, in LinkedIn, we'll have a forum around this, so we'll carry that on. Please feel free to reach back with more thoughts in it as well if you're part of today's discussion. I was just struck by a few thoughts, and I made notes on that, so I'll just read it back to you. I thought we started the discussion a little bit about what is the future of work, and I walked away with three really, statements, three really interesting ideas. The first idea of, actually the future of work is about a shift in the value added, so you shift to more higher value added work, and it's a lot of net new work. Net new work could be in terms of actually programming the algorithms and AI to be able to do the stuff, but equally new sets of careers and professions and job types that we don't know yet, and it's kind of to use the word that was used, crystal ball, but they will happen, and we've seen that every single time. I also love the comment, Gianni, you made about, but now we have AI, we didn't have it before, and that's right, it's a game changer, and it's changing the equation as it relates to the future work. And I loved the notion, Lawrence, you brought up, and I use the word bilinguals to talk about it, but this context of actually training machine learning. Machine learning is one half of it, but actually the computer part of it, computer science is one half of it. Really the other half of it is actually training and understanding enough of the domain and the context and the way the work gets done to be able to do that. I thought it was very interesting in the first part. I thought a great transition from the first discussion, what is future work, to the second part of the discussion, which is what does it mean for me? I think it was highlighted by Gianni, your comment. I'm sorry to rephrase it, but canary in the coal mines, my God, I think that captures the mindset of many of us as we try and deal with all of this change coming our way. Rob, I loved your perspective on hyper-specialization and this atomicity of work that in turn drives sort of this gig economy and the ability to be able to think about a leveraged ecosystem. We're bringing in different skill sets from different parts, and our ability to leverage that and do that in a purposeful way is going to be a large sustainable differentiator for corporations. I loved the distinction between running and designing. Or building. And Jenny, your comment about how do you think through new capabilities that are going to be required around designing and building, because increasingly running will and can be left to more autonomous and AI-based systems. And this notion, Lawrence, you brought up about, what's really required is a change in mindset. And the example you gave with the zero vacancy organization, but really the more important idea about the change in mindset around a strategic context and thinking about a sustainable strategy, not as a one-off, the problem du jour kind of an approach. And I think that's really important on the, what does it mean for me? I thought in the third part of our discussion on how to get started, I loved three comments that you made. I think, Gianna, your comment about start with experience design or designing experiences with a focus on persona, and you thought about the flow of knowledge and incorporating it back into the design mechanism, I think was right on the mark. I loved the comment, Rob, you made. How do we think about redeploying people that have domain knowledge back into the development of these new capabilities? And I think that's a real opportunity, and that's a immediate how step number one that I, with you, would endorse and actually take it to everyone that I meet with. And it's an imperative. It needs to happen now. And Lawrence, I loved your point about, I think you really sort of brought up a really important point about, look, prepare to take some risks, right? This journey is not going to be easy. And yet, at the same time, develop a management framework so as you evaluate these different experiments or innovations, that you have a methodology around sort of managing through that. I thought all three of those comments, I think, highlighted kind of your perspectives on how to approach this as a CXO executive dealing with it. And I think right on the mark. As I said before, look, this conversation could go for another 40 minutes and we still won't get to the end of it. I hope it's actually helped us sort of get a variety of different and diverse perspectives from our three guests. I want to thank each of our guests for being on this webcast with us. Thank you for so doing, and I look forward to continuing the discussion on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sanjay.